What up, good people? It is Kashaya, and today I would like to come and share a word, and it is going to be titled, You're either at the feast or on the menu. You're either at the feast or on the menu. And I have my notebook. So we're going to get into the word. All right, so I will be using scripture that is coming from Matthew 22 as well as a few other scriptures as well for this message. And I would also like to shout out all the new subscribers that have joined the Ls2Elevation YouTube channel. You are seen and appreciated, and glad to have you here on our journey as we elevate through life. All right, so let's go jump into it. We're at Matthew 22 and 3 is where we're going to start. And it reads, and this is the NIV version, but it says, He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. So when we think about things that happen throughout life, right? There are many times where God could have spared our lives from something, or um, just had grace on us concerning a situation where maybe we didn't have grace upon ourselves, or maybe we were involved in something that we should not have been involved in, and God spared our life, right? Sometimes some people who are still deeply within the world, they'll look at their lives being spared as them having extra chances to continue to do the wrong things, or continue to be involved with the wrong people, or continue to just do what they want to do and not acknowledge or realize the call that God may have on their lives. And we see that a little bit in this parable of um, the wedding banquet, right? Where God sent his servants to tell the people to come, right? Much like we see in the parable of the lost sheep. He sent, he went himself looking for the lost sheep. He left the 99 to go find the one. And oftentimes we don't realize that sometimes when God spares our lives, it is because that he's pointing out that there is something better, that he has purpose for us. And sometimes it takes multiple warnings for some people to realize that, right? So nowadays we have a lot of people who maybe their main goal is to become viral, or to just make sure they're keeping up with the trends. And to them, that's living their best life, right? They're staying on top of what's going on um, in the world, what's new, what's trendy, what's the new thing to do. And they feel like that is a version of success. And there's nothing wrong with you keeping up with what's going on. But at some point, we have to really examine what we're entangling ourselves in, right? And if what we are involving ourselves in just because it's a trend, is it the right thing to do? Is it a righteous thing to do? Is it something that entangles us deeper into the ills that the world has, right? When we go and we look at Matthew 22, 4 and 5, right, we see where the king had sent out the servants again. So he sent the servants the first time, and the guests for the wedding, they refused to come. And so the king sends his servants out a second time to gather the invited guests. They ignore his calling, and some even end up killing or mistreating the servants that the king sent to gather the guests. And we see God's grace when he sent the servants a second time, right? Because he could have sent them that first time and that could have been it, that could have been all. But he had grace in the king. I keep going back and forth between God and the king, because when you read the parable, it's ultimately an example of the kingdom of heaven, right? And we know that God is going to be in the kingdom of heaven. And so we also know that God has servants, his prophets, his priests, and just different random people sometimes that God will utilize to get us a message or to get us a word. And we are sometimes like the guest, right? Where, oh, we got this invite, but we don't have to come. We don't want to come to this. Like, we hear you calling us, we hear you ushering for us to come to this banquet, but we don't want to go. And you have some people sometimes where they'll hear the call, they'll hear the warning, and instead of taking heed to the warning, they result to violence, right? It's like, we got to shut this messenger up. We got to shut them down. Let's just go ahead and take their life. Let's kill them. And we see that with Christ, right? Christ came out to give his word to save his people that God sent him out to. He already knew that some people were going to be blind. They weren't going to hear his message. They weren't going to be able to receive the message. He knew that, right? We see that in the prayer of intercession. I believe it's Psalm 69. So he knew some people he would never be able to reach. But it's interesting because even the people who took notice of Christ, who took notice of his message, they were the same ones who mocked him, who decided that he deserved to die instead of the unrighteous, right? They chose to kill Christ instead. And we see that in this parable as well. The guests who were invited to this wedding, they decided that it was best for them to go ahead and just kill these messengers, to kill the servants. They didn't care about them living or not. They took their lives. And that's how people are sometimes when God is using somebody to send a message to give a word. And it's like, we don't got to listen to you. We don't know who you are, blah, 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 blah. Let's go ahead and take you out. Let's shut you up. We see that in this parable as well. When we look or consider the scripture that talks about the narrow or wide gate, right? It's in Matthew 7:13 and 14. It says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. The guests had a limited time to collect themselves and to get what they needed to wear to attend this wedding, right? And much like the narrow and broad gate, some people would rather go and do what they want to do, as we saw with the wedding guests in this parable. They chose to go about and continue doing whatever it was they wanted to do. They decided they didn't want to attend these guests. And there are some people today, right now, who may look at their lives and they might think, I got time to still be out partying and drinking and cutting up and tearing others down and doing all of these. I got time before this wedding banquet is ready to go, right? And even when the banquet was ready and prepared, and God sent his messengers, sent his servants to warn the people, they were still like, nah, I'm gonna still go ahead and stay in the word. I'm gonna still go ahead and take care of this. I'm gonna still go ahead and take care of that. Instead of stopping what they were doing and realizing, oh crap, I gotta get ready. I have to go. And we see that in the world today still. People would prefer the broad road, right? Which is working in our flesh, which is doing ungodly things, which is going to lead to us ultimately being devoured, right? And people choose the broad road because it's easier. The narrow gate is a little bit harder to navigate, right? There are going to be more trials, more storms, more tests that you're going to have to deal with. And most people would choose the broad gate because they don't want to go through the struggles that the narrow gate comes with, right? And so, um, when we look at the devourer, which was interesting when God gave me this message. Now, this parable in itself actually does not have many reference scriptures, but these were the words or just different things that God gave me as He gave me the title. And so, devourer was one of them. And when you look at Malachi 3:11, and you look up the Strong's word for, or the Strong's definition for devour, it means to eat, literally or figuratively, burn up, consume, or dine. So when we choose to continue to walk in the world and not accept God's adoption for us, right? Ultimately, we are being ate up. We are being eaten by the choices that we are making. Because we see in the parable of the wedding banquet that the people who chose to kill or to murder the servants that were sent out to warn these people that it was time for the wedding guests, they ended up being killed. They ended up being killed. They were literally, let me read it to you. Hold on. And we are at, let me see, this is Matthew 22:7. It says, the king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. And it's interesting because when you look at devourer, it means also burn up, consume. So In this, the actions that the guests took as far as killing or murdering the servants or the messengers that were sent to tell them about the wedding being ready for them to attend, cost them their life. They ended up being devoured. They ended up being burnt up by their decision to kill the messenger instead of just simply attending the wedding. And so when we also look at the word devour, right, we have First Peter 5:8, and it talks about being sober, being vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, our choices will determine whether or not we get to celebrate at the wedding when Christ comes and returns, or whether or not we're going to be devoured because of the choices that we made in life. And so we have a choice. We have a choice. And we're going to be compensated based off of that decision that we make. So we can either be at the feast or we can be on the menu. And that's my message for the day. Enjoy. Love you later.